Hi guys, Everyday Aficionados here with an official Feminist Fright Fest review of the Halloween series. And the two we're going to be looking at, and the ones which we think are the most interesting to talk about from a feminist perspective, is the original and the 2018 sequel. They're both called Halloween, so the only thing that distinguishes them is the year next to their title. Now, Shawn, the first one came out in what year?
1978.
1978, that's right. So they're almost, 30 years apart, 40 years apart?
Exactly 40 years apart. And the funny part is that the 2018 movie actually does take place 40 years after the original event. So it completely ignores all the sequels except for the original 1978 film. Part of the reason that we picked Halloween 78 and the 2018 version, again, you mentioned already, we think in terms of like feminist perspective, I think it's more interesting to discuss those two films because those other sequels kind of go off the rails a little bit so much, and there's just not as much, there's like more volume to talk about, but still less substance, I think. And most people know of Halloween as being like, it's probably the most famous of like the last girl sort of style of like slasher films, even though it wasn't necessarily the first to do that. I mean, Texas Chainsaw came out like a few years before that in 74. And it did the last girl thing too. So it's not the first to do it, but it's probably the most famous. So I think it's a perfect franchise to look at for a Feminist Fright Fest. We always recommend that you kind of watch the films before you watch our analysis videos or reviews, but we're going to give a little bit of a background of both films. So I'll talk about 78 a little bit, and then if you want to talk about 2018, Miguel, I'll start off. So 78, it's basically about this group of high school teenage girls, babysitters that essentially are planning their night for Halloween. And during that night, this killer from a local psychiatric ward, Michael Myers, escapes and he starts wreaking havoc in their neighborhood. Of course, everyone knows Dr. Loomis, Sam Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance, his infamous character hunting down Michael Myers the entire film, trying to stop his rampage. And then, of course, you have Jamie Lee Curtis as the final girl in the original film and the subsequent star in the 2018 version.
While the first film is actually pretty simple from a plot standpoint, the sequel is a little bit more complicated. Of course, that's because it's building on an already established franchise, so it has a lot that it has to sort of react to or be in conversation with. So in this film, it's, as Shawn said, 40 years after the original. And Jamie Lee Curtis is much older and has sort of built this fortress of a house for herself because she knows that Michael is going to escape at some point. Now again, this movie retcons all of the sequels, so including the second one. So in this version of the Halloween universe, Michael only killed 6 people on that first night of Halloween, and he was captured. He's been in a psychiatric institution ever since, under the care of a new psychiatrist. Dr. Loomis passed away. I'm not sure how he died in this universe. So we have these journalists who are doing a story on Michael. We have this psychiatrist who's somewhat obsessed with Michael. He's being transferred to another facility. Jamie Lee Curtis knows about this and believes he's going to escape. She's trying to prepare her family to defend themselves against him. But basically, that's the setup to the film. You have Jamie Lee Curtis, her daughter, and her granddaughter, who both at first don't understand the threat of Michael. They see Jamie Lee Curtis as being kind of paranoid, as being traumatized by her experiences, and so she's sort of lost grip with reality, whereas we, as the audience, know that she's right. Michael is going to escape, and he does, and he goes on another killing rampage and threatens her family. So the film is ultimately about them coming together as a family and defending themselves from Michael, not just as a family, but as a family of women, because, as we'll talk about, the men in the film do absolutely nothing to protect these women. So it sort of reverses what happened in the first film with Loomis sort of saving Jamie Lee Curtis as the damsel in distress. But we'll talk about that with our analysis.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to start off, is by talking about the original film. As a whole, I mean, obviously, it's about this man stalking and preying on women, specifically preying on women in sexual situations a lot of the times. And I believe he said this in the review that we did in the past, but the tones of the kills in this film, there's a strong undercurrent of like sexual tones to the kills. Like Michael Myers is sort of getting off on this. Like he's this sort of like sexually frustrated, charged male. I mean, like when I just watched it back recently, it's gonna sound funny, but like it almost came off to me like he was like some sort of like incel or something like that in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I think the first film specifically is portraying him as a misogynist killer, and it shows that through, as you said, he specifically targets young women. He kills them in ways that are sexualized. In fact, in the first film, and this is what's sort of weird tonally about the first film, and that's hard to tell whether or not like it's maybe like a tongue-in-cheek ironic critique of this genre of sexually exploitative slasher films, because he kills the women in very sexual ways, and the film actually turns it into a joke in some scenes. Like there's one part where he's strangling a babysitter with a telephone cord while she's on the phone with Jamie Lee Curtis, and it sounds like she's having sex with someone, basically, the sounds that she's making. And Jamie Lee Curtis assumes that that's what's happening, and so there's this dramatic irony where we as the audience know that she's being killed, but Jamie Lee Curtis thinks that her friend just called her to, like, I don't know, I guess like brag about the fact that she's having sex and have her listen in on it. And I don't really know what the film is doing with that scene, like if the film is like making a joke out of this woman's murder, but I don't know, it was really hard for me to read that tone and really to understand like how I'm supposed to feel about that scene. I think the film definitely portrays a group of women who seem at least sexually liberated in a certain sense. They're assertive in their sexuality. They don't seem to be ashamed at all of it. They party, they drive around, they pursue boys, they do drugs. I mean, but the film doesn't seem to be shaming them for it, is what I find really interesting. Now, you could say the film does shame them for it because they end up getting murdered, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say that it shames them for it, because Myers just seems to kill anyone who gets in his way, and it doesn't seem like they were killed for being, any worse than anyone else.
Although the one thing I will point out, which I think will come back and be more important later on once we're talking about the 2018 film, is that this group of women in this movie seems a little bit like disjointed. Like they don't necessarily always stand up for each other. They're not always there for each other or supporting each other. And I think that sort of ends up leading to their downfall in the end, at least, the majority of the group. And that's going to be an important theme for the film coming up.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're entirely right. I think if anything, that's sort of the main critique of the film, is that all of these girls seem to be kind of out for themselves in certain ways and like really not sensitive to the problems of their friends and the people around them. And ultimately they don't come together to protect each other, which we see that trend reversed in the sequel in 2018. And one thing I will say that does come across pretty clear, at least to me, is the way Michael is portrayed as specifically a misogynist killer. We see that through his primary choice of victims, which are these young babysitters. We see that through the fact that he is almost presented a bit as like a sexual predator. And we see these point of view shots where he's stalking the women, looking at them through windows, watching them. There's also something that I found really interesting, and this is the most interesting part of the original film. The most interesting moment is, in my opinion, when Michael is unmasked, where Jamie Lee Curtis, at the end of their struggle, she basically takes his mask off him for a moment, just as he almost overpowered her, and that leaves him helpless. And suddenly you see his face, and he looks almost pathetic. in a way, right? Like, we throughout the film we've seen him in this mask. He's this imposing figure. He's done all of these horrible crimes, all of this horrible murder, and then finally we see his face. We see he's injured, right? Because Jamie Lee Curtis has stabbed his eye, so he's bleeding out of his eye. He's bruised. In his eyes, he just looks almost afraid after he's unmasked. And what that communicated to me was that ultimately he's just a man. And not only is he just a man, he's a pathetic man who hides behind this mask so that he can do violence to other people, so that he can separate himself from his actions. And that just reminded me of sort of the metaphor of masculinity as being a mask, in a way, that men use to sort of shield their emotions and to sort of allow themselves to commit violence against others, right, by using this mask of masculinity. And that, I think, is really what Michael is doing in that first film. And so that moment when he's unmasked is when he's truly vulnerable, and that's when he's defeated. That's when Loomis shoots him. That's when he falls out of the window, is when he's unmasked, and when we realize that he's just a man. He's just this pathetic, misogynist figure who's been, hiding behind this mythos the entire time to allow himself to commit violence against women.
So moving into the 2018 sequel, this is where I think it kind of gets interesting, at least from my perspective, because I think when you watch the 2018 movie with the 1978 film in mind, it puts a lot of the pieces together and sort of, like, it really hammers home to me that, like, in the original, like, Michael Myers is this sort of, like, awkward, almost like young, like incel type, like toxic masculine character who's attacking and assaulting and abusing women. And then you fast forward into the 2018 version, or the 2018 film, and you are seeing the repercussions of his toxic masculinity. You see how it's affected Jamie Lee Curtis, how it's affected her family. She basically couldn't even live or have a normal life because of what happened to her and the experiences and the trauma that she has from what Michael Myers did to her in the first film.
Yes, you're completely right. We see that the effects of his actions have destroyed so many people's lives. Not just the lives of the people he's murdered, but of the survivors as well, who've been affected by PTSD, and their lives have been, forever changed. And just as you said, Michael has changed. He's been in confinement now for 40 years, and he's almost become hardened and even more singularly obsessed with killing. And we see that in the way he kills now in this film. It's much quicker. It's much less drawn out. He's just like going and like killing people straight out rather than stalking them for a long time.
It's much less sexualized. You don't see really any voyeur shots at all. Again, it's very quick kills, very brutal and to the point. It's almost like he's not really getting that sort of pleasure sexually or whatever it was in the first film. He's not getting that from these kills anymore. He's almost just sort of doing it to like finish what he never necessarily finished in the first film.
And with Jamie Lee Curtis, we also see an interesting evolution in that now she has become much more self-reliant, but almost to a point of harming her own life and her social connections. She's become so singularly obsessed with surviving that she's driven away her family members and her contacts with other people in society, and all she thinks about every day is how she's going to defend herself and how she's going to kill Michael Myers when he escapes. And she even says at one point in the film that she's prayed every day for him to escape so that she can kill him and hunt him down. So now the roles are almost reversed, where she's become the hunter.
And I think that's sort of an important theme, because she's gotten to the point in her life where she's realized that the system, that the patriarchy, it's not going to save her. Dr. Loomis, the men in her life, the system did not save her the first time, and it failed her again. It let Michael Myers back on the streets again. And that cycle is just going to repeat until she sort of steps in and does something and stops it and takes control of it herself. And that's what she's been preparing for this for years in this film, in order to do that, in order to sort of deal with her problems and move past the trauma because the system isn't going to do it for her. And we mentioned before that the men in this 2018 version, they're pretty much useless. Like the cops are useless. They just immediately get killed. The doctor is assisting and aiding Michael Myers in this film. The father couldn't even protect his family even if he wanted to. The only thing that can really stop Michael Myers, stop the abuse, is essentially this close-knit group of women, this family of women getting together and stopping it together and working together.
And defending each other and helping each other. So it's that, and I think that's a very radical message as compared to the first film, which, although the first film I think was kind of progressive in its time in that, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis survives, she defends herself from Michael in several cases, but ultimately she's saved by Loomis. So she is a bit of a damsel in distress ultimately, which is unfortunate. It's very different from another film that came out at a similar time, Alien, where I think Sigourney Weaver, who is also, you could say, a final girl in that film, is much more self-reliant than Jamie Lee Curtis was in the original Halloween. But this film gives us a much more unambiguously radical, I would say, not just progressive, idea of, or representation of, women's empowerment, and in that being collective self-defense, community self-defense, not just individualistic self-empowerment fantasies, because ultimately they all have to come together and use their skills together to defeat this man. It's not just Jamie Lee Curtis, it's not just her daughter or granddaughter, it's all of them who come together, each of them who are failed by these men. Just like you said, Jamie Lee Curtis's daughter is failed by her husband, who doesn't want to take any of these threats seriously and doesn't want to prepare at all for it. Her granddaughter is failed by her male friends, who her boyfriend cheats on her and then destroys her cell phone, which leaves her completely helpless. And then the psychiatrist who's transporting her granddaughter actually basically almost offers her up as a sacrifice to Michael Myers. And then Jamie Lee Curtis herself, who Hawkins, the police officer, the deputy, is completely incompetent compared to her, and basically like gets killed because he's not looking out enough and not, you know, paying attention to all of the threats around him.
Again, there's the themes of like facing your abuser, but there's also some themes of kind of like the way that abuse victims are treated in real life, because you can see that in the way that people are interacting with Laurie, especially early on in the film. Like they're treating her like the experience that she'd gone through, like, oh, just like get over it already. Like, I don't understand, like, why you're still holding on to this. Like, there's no sympathizing for the trauma that she's been through. No one's like asking her what's wrong or like being there for her or supporting her. They're all even sort of like gaslighting her, trying to convince her that Michael Myers isn't actually a monster or a boogeyman. In fact, like a lot of the humanizing that's done early on in the film is done towards Michael Myers even. You have these group of reporters that are like super interested in finding out more about Michael Myers and like what makes him tick, what makes a human do what he's done. But no one really cares about the human side of Laurie and like the damage that's been done to her, the trauma that's been done to her. In fact, even when the reporters, when they're talking with her, they're way more aggressive. Like they're asking her like about her daughter getting taken away and when she ever got her daughter back, knowing ahead of time that she never did get her daughter back. She never got the custody of her daughter back. And they knew that, but they were still antagonizing her in the interviews 5 minutes after they were humanizing Michael Myers and giving him his mask back at the psych ward.
Yeah, it's almost like the film is commenting on the fact that the audience of slasher films in general are more interested in these murderers than they are in the victims and the survivors of them. And just in society, it's commenting on society in general, how that's the case. How, you know, just look at all of these documentaries we have about mass murderers and that are just documenting their crimes and giving them more fame rather than uplifting the victims, you know, whose lives have been ruined by them. So I think the film is very much commenting on that disparity that's ultimately driven by misogyny, by the fact that it's been made into this form of entertainment, that the mass murderers of women are celebrities, essentially.
I think the best way to look at it too is just like who each film spends the most time with in terms of like perspective. And if you look at the original 1978, again, there's a lot of perspective like behind the eyes of Michael Myers, like behind the eyes of this toxic masculine killer, and you're viewing the event sort of through his eyes in the original. So you're seeing the source of the trauma in the beginning, and then the next film, it spends a lot more time with Laurie, and you see things now from Laurie's perspective, and you're seeing the consequences of that first film in the second one, and you're seeing Laurie kind of taking charge, and it switches the perspectives between the two films. Again, there's no like point of view shots anymore in the 2018 version behind the mask of Michael Myers or anything like that. That's completely out of it. In fact, it does the opposite. Like you see Laurie as like the hunter almost at the end of the film. They almost never play the iconic Halloween theme in the 2018 version. In fact, the only time that I actually could remember it playing was at the very end when they finally do trap Michael Myers in the basement and do away with him. So it's almost like now Laurie is the one in power because she has gotten together with her family unit with these other women, and they have taken charge and they have taken down this abuser that has caused so much trauma through generations and generations of their family.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very fitting end, and it was a very satisfying sequel. And I think it did a great job of rounding out and making up for the flaws in the original and showing that progress. And I'm also glad really that it retconned all of those sequels, which some of them are entertaining, but most of them are pretty much worthless.
It feels like a much more natural progression of the story and a way more satisfying conclusion to the story, even though they're making another film after this one. So yeah, not quite sure how that's going to go or if I even want to see it, but I'm just going to act like this is the way that the series is going to end.
So now, if you haven't watched an Everyday Aficionados review before, something that we do is we score every film, and we create an arbitrary scoring unit for each film depending on the context of that film. For example, when we reviewed the original Halloween, which you can look at our review if you're interested, our full review of Halloween 1978, we gave it 4 out of 5 William Shatner masks. So now it's time to rate these two films, but rate them on the new Everyday Aficionados Feminist scale. So for Halloween 1978, Shawn, how many feminist points should we give it?
I think it's like a right around a 3.5 feminist points out of 5, I would say.
I would agree. I think 3.5 is reasonable. The fact that it shows this, woman who's able to survive this mass murderer through her own wits for the most part is progressive, but ultimately she's a damsel in distress. I also think it does deserve points for showing sexually liberated women and, showing realistic portrayals of women, even though it does portray them as kind of ditzy, and ultimately they are killed off. So you can see that as a critique of them or as an exploitation. So it definitely wouldn't rank too highly. I don't think it should rank too highly on the feminist scale. So I think 3.5 out of 5 is reasonable for the time it came out. What do you think about the new film?
For the new one, I would give it a full point higher, so maybe like right around a 4.5.
Yeah, I think that's entirely appropriate. I would definitely say 4.5 feminist points out of 5 for Halloween 2018.
I was actually going to jump in and say that if we're like including them together as one big movie, I guess, or one big sort of feminist movie marathon with the two films, I would put it at a 5 in total. Like if you include the first part with the story of the second part, I think it would be a 5 or close to it.
I think that's definitely reasonable. I think if you take them as a pair, you could give it a 5 because it shows that progression, as we said, and the new film is really radical with the suggestion that communal self-defense, women's communal self-defense, is the solution to patriarchal and misogynist violence, which I think is an incredibly appropriate, theme, especially today. Okay, well, thank you for joining us on our Everyday Aficionados discussion of Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2018. We hope you found it illuminating and that we gave some interesting analysis from a feminist perspective of these two films and their progression story-wise. If you're interested in more of our video reviews, you can check out our movie review channel, Everyday Aficionados Movie Reviews. And if you're interested in our other content, you can just look up Everyday Aficionados on YouTube and you can see all of our channels where we do reviews of different things as well. So thank you for joining us. That's the Everyday Aficionados out.